bollocks, Angel. It's your brand of bollocks from first to last.
You can't ever see the big picture. You can't see any picture.
I am talking about something primal, right? Savagery, brutal animal instinct.
And that wins out every time with you. You know, the human race has evolved, Spike.
Oh, into a bunch of namby-pamby, self-analyzing wankers who could never hope to
We're bigger,
overcome
we're
pure
smarter. Plus,
aggressors.
there's a thing called teamwork, not to mention the superstitious terror of your pure
You just
aggressors.
want it to be the way you want it
It's
to
not
be.
about what I want.
Sorry. Is this something we should all be discussing?
No.
It just sounds a little serious.
It was mostly theoretical.
We were just working out of... Look, if cavemen and astronauts got into a fight, who would win?
Oh. You've been yelling at each other for 40 minutes about this. Do the astronauts have weapons?
No.
And that's us testing the limits of fair use and the goodwill of Fox TV. Right there in a scene from Angel that sets the pace for what we're going to talk about today. Welcome to Open World Chat. I'm one of your hosts, John Odom, and I'm here with my co-host, Mark Card.
Hiya.
How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you?
I am surviving, which is all any of us can ask of the world, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to have a conversation that Mark was your brainchild here. Why don't you set us up?
Well, let's talk a little bit about backstory for this particular clip, this particular thing, this particular idea of cavemen versus astronauts. So
Cavemen versus astronauts.
the lore is that in the writer's room of the TV show Angel, the creator Joss Whedon got there early. And they knew what they were going to write about in terms of the storyline, but the only thing he wrote on the whiteboard was cavemen versus astronauts. Who would win? And he arrived early so that his writing team, which by the way went on to do incredible things, would craft this episode around this idea. And so when he came back a few hours later, they were fighting like cats and dogs over this particular the question.
Fighting like cats and dogs, or fighting like cavemen and
astronauts?
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting because I was doing some looking on the net today also, and somebody asked an interesting question on Reddit, which said, is the origin of this a TV show from the 60s called It's About Time? So that came out in 1966, and it was one season. And here was the premise. Some astronauts were time traveling on a mission for NASA, and they landed on Earth during the Neolithic Age.
And was it violent? I mean, did they fight each other?
No, it was a comedy.
Oh, it was a comedy.
You know, it was that screwball, Sherwood Schwartz written score kind of crazy comedy. So it's kind of like a time traveling version of Gilligan's Island.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's interesting that comes up. But the whole idea here is if you put these two groups of people in an arena where they can fight, no weapons, who's going to win? And it's really just a question of, are civilized humans going to be more effective at survival, or are those who deal with survival every single day going to be better at survival? And what I like about this is that you see it everywhere in not just in science fiction or fantasy, but in, you know, highfalutin literature. This is everywhere. This was one of the most important debates of the Enlightenment.
Yeah, there's a lot to dig up here. And we should start at the shallow end, I think, and then go into the deep end, because I have a lot of thoughts on this too. I have a lot. Well, I don't want to give away the ghost here. What's the expression? Well, anyways, I don't want to give anything away, but Maybe we should dive right into it. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So we're sure they have no weapons. Why is that no fair to have, or why is that fair that they have no weapons?
Well, he didn't say they couldn't acquire weapons.
Ah,
That they have no weapons. So in the initial conditions, neither one has weapons.
oh.
And that's just because if technology is a part of the equation, then astronauts are already ahead.
So is this a cage match we're talking about?
And we don't get any details.
Hmm.
So I can tell you kind of the parameters that I thought of.
Okay. Okay.
And
Well,
that
I'm going to
I,
mess with them.
that's great. So the parameters I have is that through some uh, magical means, and keeping in mind Asimov's quote about any sufficiently developed or advanced technology would be indistinguishable from magic. Imagine that they are suddenly transported to a planet where they know of each other's presence, but they have to seek each other out and they have to fight to the death.
Mhm.
So to me, nobody has any weapons. All they're both clothed in the style of whatever they have.
I was going to ask you that. Are the astronauts in their astronaut suits?
Well, I don't know about their astronaut suits, but they're in civilian clothing
Oh, I
because,
think it matters. I think it matters.
well, no, yeah, but I think that disadvantages the astronauts.
I think it possibly advantages the astronauts because then it's easier to play to the superstitious nature. Well, superstitious might be a bit advanced. It depends on what kind of caveman we're talking. But if we're talking some, Neanderthals, and there's going to be superstitious nature. If we're talking older than that, it just might be easier to frighten them.
Or well, you're talking about younger than that, it could be religious. So,
Right. I was sort of figuring superstitious covered that,
yeah.
but yeah, you're absolutely
Um,
right.
well, I think superstitious is a bit less organized.
That's
It's more
true.
of a reaction, and religious is a bit more organized. But what I was thinking in terms of spacesuits is, well, spacesuits are bulky and hard to maneuver in because they're not used for, they're designed for extraterrestrial activity.
That's true. It's all or nothing with the spacesuits. Either
Right,
you're going to scare the shit out of them or it's not going to work.
right. So that's my kind of parameters is that they're both beamed into a completely neutral environment and that nobody has any weapons and they are all clothed normally.
Beamed in. See, it's interesting that you said beamed in
Well,
because,
that's just for lack of any other word. That goes back to the whole thing about any sufficiently advanced technology.
yeah, but it also goes to Kirk and the Gorn,
Yeah, that's right.
doesn't it?
No, yeah. Well,
Well,
no,
the Gorn is slow moving. The
I have an
Gorn
even
is
better
slow
one for you in
moving.
this regard.
Yeah, but he's
Uh,
primal, and Kirk puts together a weapon from what's around.
oh, I've got a better episode.
Hmm.
The one with Lincoln and Surak.
Yeah.
I can't remember the name of that episode, but it's the one where
The
Kirk and
Savage Curtain.
that's right, the Savage Curtain, where you have the rock beastie. And that is really good versus evil. But
Right,
it's the exact same premise. Are the savages going to do better than the people who have a sense of morality?
right, right. I
This is
mean,
go ahead.
we're getting a field a bit from the original, but we're talking about the same themes that they're talking about. So, and that's where it gets so interesting. But I think there's lots of kinds of cavemen and modern people. Okay. You could drop some modern people in who just go, ah, and run around. Or what if you have more than one person? Then you can have teamwork.
Oh no, I don't think it's considered as one person versus one person. I think the original scenario is a group of people, cavemen versus astronauts,
It's true. It's true.
caveman versus astronaut.
Well, what if the astronauts are astronaut ninjas?
Well, this gets to an interesting point of mine because astronauts, if you think about it, are the closest thing we have to superheroes. Astronauts have to be superbly physically conditioned because being in space is very, very tough on your body. So they undergo weight training, they undergo cardio training, they have a very, very difficult physical regimen. And then on the other side of it, they are all engineers and scientists. And we're talking about rocket scientists. We're not talking about political scientists. We're talking about people who are trained in solving problems and trained in teamwork. And a lot of astronauts come from the military. So you've got this combination of tactical thinking, uh, high physical training, applying the scientific method, and survival training.
Mhm.
Astronauts all have to undergo survival training in case they end up like in the end of Gravity, where Sandra Bullock has crashed down somewhere that nobody knows where she is. And so they have to undergo all these different kinds of trainings. And at the very least, if they're not superheroes, they are at least Tony Stark without the suit.
Well, there you go. There's to follow that superhero line, there's the Batman effect, right? Everybody says you go to the geek boards, you go to the comic boards, and it's like, this versus this, who versus who would win? Batman versus everybody is always the same.
Yeah,
Batman has time to prepare, even without weapons and things. He's Batman, and he always wins. If you just, happen to run into each other, like Batman versus Superman, Batman gets his ass handed to him.
right. Yeah.
But Batman with time to get ready will always find a way. So that's the other thing is do astronauts have time to prepare? Because then you have to grant the cavemen time to prepare, but the cavemen couldn't prepare.
Well, they could
Because they're
prepare as
cavemen.
best as they could, because keep in mind, cavemen from very early on organized to hunt beasts much larger than they were. So they had organization. And the other thing people don't have to understand, I mean, people need to understand when they think about this debate is, are we talking about Neanderthals? Or are we talking about Cro-Magnon? Because Cro-Magnon men, they're no different than we are. And
Right. Or earlier or older than that, even.
right, right. So
Go either direction.
yeah. So this kind of thing, it's interesting because I used to, when I was teaching political science, I would early on in the term I would split my class up into two sides, and they'd have this debate. And so the reason why I did it was I wanted them to get used to talking about things and debating things with each other and doing it in kind of a civil way, in a structured way. So we went through all of these things. And so we've kind of bounced around, and they would say, well, the cavemen are going to survive because they're going to win because they're used to daily struggle. They're used to savagery all the time.
Right.
They're used to kill or be killed.
Hmm.
But again, I would go back and say, well, the psychology is probably not that much different. You put somebody now into a fight or flight situation, and they don't really have a whole lot of control how they react, at least physiologically. They'll either fight or they'll run. And
Maybe
that's
they both
because,
run. What if they both run? That's a draw right there.
well, but see, the thing is, the contest is not over until one side dies.
Oh, what if they just run and starve to death? All right, never mind. You were talking about some deeper concepts behind this, not just who's the more badass under what circumstances and who isn't. And tell me more about what you're thinking there.
Well, this is the barbarian at the gates. What do you do when civilization falls apart? Do you try to preserve that civilization and live by a set of moral guidelines and a set of prescribed behaviors? Or do you just do whatever it takes to get to survive? And I think that's the fundamental question behind The Walking Dead, for an example.
Yes, I think there is a lot to be said for zombie fiction in this as a metaphor here too. I
Well, I
mean,
mean,
not necessarily, but this idea that what you're setting up is a situation between modern people and something that is just primal instinct. Um, I don't want to say unstoppable. Well, it's not unstoppable. They stop zombies all the time, but this horde that you're referring to
I think it goes deeper than that because if you look at The Walking Dead, what you find is that the zombies you can deal with, the real enemy is the other people.
Ultimately, yeah.
Ultimately, in that show, the zombies are just a nuisance. They're just a I wouldn't say that a nuisance, that's not the right term. They are the catalyst for the discussion of do you survive by eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, and giving up any idea that society still survives? Or do you try to hold on to the principles of, morality, law, fairness, justice, honesty? And that's shown really early on in the TV show The Walking Dead, but in the spoiler alert, but I think the show's over, so I don't think it's a problem. Where Rick is trying to maintain some kind of semblance of society, and his buddy, which I can't think of his name, he is saying, "Screw that, we can't do that. We're going to end up all dying if we worry about keeping a set of rules." And so you get this kind of set of factions. We have to be more like savages to survive this zombie apocalypse on the one side. And on the other side is how do we survive if we lose our sense of justice and fair play and morality and prescribed actions, don't we lose everything?
Right. Do our advances amount to anything at the end of the day? That's a question that gets
And this
asked
is
a lot in this. That is the question that comes from this original topic we're talking about.
Yeah, well, and I think you find this in all kinds of things. I think this is a big theme you see in Star Trek. We have to mention Star Trek again. That's the premise of this podcast is that in all episodes, Star Trek will be referred to. But if you look at Star Trek, you have these outside forces, which, the board don't really care about morality and justice, and they care about order, but that order comes at the price of individual expression, liberty, and the interesting thing to me is they're even more technologically advanced, but it's still this caveman versus astronauts. And you see in the original series too. Why do you think Kirk is always arguing with computers?
Because he has a particular talent of talking them into destroying themselves.
Yes, because it's in the script.
Right. I like some of these where we go with some of these direct, simple comparisons, though. Like, oh, shoot, kids versus slee stacks. There you go.
That's a great one. Or Will Ferrell versus Slee Stack.
Yeah, there's
since he's pretty childlike to begin with.
Yeah, no, you're right. That could have been a good movie, but never mind. That's another topic. It hurt that cuts at my soul, but
I don't know. I kind of
love
liked
that
it.
little lost.
I like that they
God.
turned everything on its ear. Besides, it has Leonard Nimoy in it. How can it be terrible?
I don't even remember Leonard Nimoy in it.
He's the guy who plays the Slee Stack who talks to them uh remotely. He's you think he's trying to help them get out, but he's really trying to manipulate time and space so the Slee Stack can take over. And they
See,
only
this is
find
how
out
much I hated that movie. I don't even remember Leonard
that's
Nimoy.
Leonard Nimoy's voice. He did the voice acting for that character.
Oh man, there was potential there, and now that potential is gone.
But let's talk about another space movie. Enemy Mine. You remember that one?
Yeah, although they were both modern men. I think that was the whole point of the movie.
Well, no, I agree with that. They were both modern men, but what were they battling?
Oh, the rest of the environment around them.
That's right. And that represents the whole, and we get into movies like what was it, the M. Night Shyamalan movie The Happening, where the humans are the bad guys because they're destroying the natural order of things. The natural order of things decides to fight back.
Man versus nature is, yes, another element that you could draw from this astronauts versus cavemen thing. I mean, they're both, humans, but one is you can associate much more with this sort of raw natural world, and it just looks like us. So that's another whole way you can go with it too. And that's pretty cool. They have flipped that sometimes, though. And I think of cowboys. I think of all these cowboy movies. I think of cowboys and aliens. I think of the Valley of Gwangi with cowboys versus dinosaurs.
Right, right.
There, the cowboys are sort of playing the role of caveman, and the aliens are the more advanced ones. And cowboys win. And with Valley of Gwangi, it's cowboys versus dinosaurs, and cowboys are the advanced ones.
Yeah.
Well, they capture. See, Wally and Guanji goes both ways. They catch the dinosaurs, and then the dinosaurs run amok. So there you go. It's a draw between humanity and
Well,
nature there.
speaking of dinosaurs, we can go to Jurassic Park for this basic theme too.
Oh, that's all about humans versus nature. That's the whole point of it. Absolutely.
But it's still, are humans going to survive because of their adaptation of advanced technology, or is that going to be their end?
Right.
Well, then, that's the whole thing about, Jeff Goldblum saying, well, life finds a way. That's the whole thing he's saying. He's saying that, well, the natural world is going to win here. So perhaps you shouldn't screw with it if you're the top, if you're the apex predator.
I think we should do the entire rest of this episode with you doing a Jeff Goldblum impression.
Oh, no, that was terrible. I sounded more like William Shatner than Jeff Goldblum,
I don't
but
know.
I don't think they're too far off each other.
Well, where else can we go with this? I mean,
Well, it
you
depends.
name dropped Rousseau, I think, at one point, even.
I did indeed. So this is a big debate in 16th and 17th century philosophy. On the one hand, you've got Hobbes, and Hobbes is
Oh,
famous.
yes, the law firm of nasty, brutish, and short.
Yeah, well, he says basically that if man is left in the state of nature, that life is nasty, brutish, and short. If we give in to our baser natures, then everyone dies. And in order to avoid this, you have to have a strong moral authoritative force to make sure that people behave.
Mhm.
And he said the state of nature is just the worst possible outcome, that we have to impose some kind of organization on top of this so we can maintain rights, so we can have some kind of ability to see each other civilly. And keep in mind that Hobbes is writing in the middle of the English Civil War, where religious, sectarian problems are, ravaging the British population. And he's trying to make some kind of sense out of it. So his basic premise is that you can't let nature govern everything. I mean, you can't let nature take it over. You have to find some kind of overarching force to govern the nastier, baser instincts of man.
Mm.
I think it's kind of interesting. When I used to teach this, I would say that if you want to understand how bad things are during the state of nature, just remember what it was like to be in the seventh grade. And
Well,
then,
now that brings a thought to mind here in the astronauts versus cavemen context. Maybe the key then is for the astronauts to essentially civilize the cavemen. Maybe the approach that allows the astronauts to win is is to ignore the fight to the death completely and instead play Jane Goodall or Diane Fossey and try to make contact there with the primitive primate.
well, that's interesting, but we have to go back to the old supernatural kind of presence. Are you going to fear what you know is obviously superior to you, or are you going to try and fight against it
Right.
from the caveman point of view? So I wanted to go back a little bit and talk about the other side of the philosophical coin. So clearly, Hobbes is on Team Astronaut.
Yeah.
You've got to have some kind of civilizing force to take care of everybody else's problems, to kind of mitigate everyone else's baser instincts. Rousseau, the next century, would say that's crazy. He would say that imposition of government and social structure and economic structures limit man, and that only in the state of nature are we perfectly attuned and perfectly in harmony with each other. And that only by this, for lack of a better word, because he would not have used this word, but it becomes essential in the 19th in the 18th century. He talks about, essentially hints at liberty, that if men are left alone, they'll be part of liberty. And that under liberty, only then can they pursue their highest goals. Of course, Hobbes would say that's poppycock, because then everyone will just kill each other for whatever meager part of the resources they can get.
Yeah,
And
but
then,
what about community in there?
well, that's a very good question, and it leads into what I was going to say next. This whole question about imposing values on society through an overarching structure and leaving man alone and not creating quite so many social, political, and economic structures on man. Now you're talking about the communism versus capitalism debate.
Yeah, at its broadest.
Yes, of course, that is broadest, because communism and capitalism are not political structures solely. They're mostly economic structures.
Right.
And the political structures you put on to create these systems always end up being corrupted. But the point is that this is a really deep well for anybody that wants to write in the science fiction, fantasy, or lots of other different kinds of genres of fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And it all comes from this basic idea: are we better off civilized, or are we better off relying on our baser nation, our baser instincts, our baser nature?
Yeah, so I think looking back at all of what we've been saying, the question is stacked if it's about a fight to the death. It's a stacked question against the astronauts. I think it would be much more fair to just say who wins. Who wins without saying it's about death. It could be about death.
Right,
It
right.
could be about some other kind of dominance and control. But just saying a fight to the death, that's unfair. That is not fair. That is not a reasonable conflict to create.
Well, we have to go back to the reason why he put that on the whiteboard in the writers' room. In that episode, spoiler alert, the most charming, sweetest member of Team Angel is exposes herself to the sarcophagus of an ancient god, Illyria. And Illyria infects her with some kind of horrible bacteria and basically liquefies her from the inside out and takes over her body.
Ew.
And so Team Angel does whatever they possibly can to try and stop it. And the conclusion from the episode is that Cavemen wins.
Hmm.
The ancient one has more power than humans will ever have. And now we're getting into cosmic horror at this point.
Yeah. I still say it's no fair. Unless we're talking ninja.
I think yeah, no, it isn't fair. But he was trying to get a specific outcome for the plot of this specific episode.
Yeah.
He stacked the deck on purpose. Oh no, Joss Whedon stacking the deck. That's never been done. That's never been discussed before.
Well, I want to see ninjas versus cavemen. I keep coming back to that because that's the question I want to ask. That balances it out for you.
Well, I mean, this goes back to all kinds of places. Is it the Rome versus the Huns? Is it, there's all kinds of ways to go with this, but I think it's an important thing that people really don't talk about much. You see it in movies, you see it in books, you see it in television, but in terms of the linkages you can make from this idea to some of the most popular, most interesting things we see out there in the medium.
So Joss Whedon thinks that baser instincts always are more powerful than the modern impulse, is what you're saying.
Well, I mean, in Angel, that's true. Yes, he says that in Angel. I don't think he says that in the Avengers.
No, I don't think he does.
I don't think so. So I would say, for that episode, yes. But, like I said, he had an ulterior motive. He was looking for a specific kind of conclusion in an episode of a TV show.
Mhm.
But, he also, you could argue, if you look at Buffy, that he argues that humanity and civilization is what saves the universe. Just look at one example, and I don't know the name of it. There's an episode in season 4 or 5 where Tara's family comes back and says, "Oh, we got to take you back because you're going to turn into a horrible witch and
With
you're going to
Amy
kill
Adams, as
everybody."
I recall. Is that
Yeah, Amy Adams. Yeah, she does a role in that. And they all band together and say, "That's a bunch of BS. You're just trying to hold her down because you don't want a powerful woman in your family."
Mhm.
And it's interesting because who solves the question about whether or not she's going to be a witch? Spike, the demon, one of the old ones, punches her in the face because he's got the chip in his head. And if she's a demon, he can battle her. Well, it turns out he just punches her in the nose and she gets hurt and he gets hurt. And we find out that, well, really, it's the human, it's the civilizing element that wins.
Although you could also say violence just there solved everything. A punch in the nose will solve everything.
Oh, yeah. Oh, we have way too much of that going on these days.
So what do you think, Mark, if we talk this one to death?
I think we've just scratched the surface, but I think that's
Oh.
enough. I think that's enough for today.
That's great. Well, you're probably right,
But
actually.
you never told me, who do you think wins? I think astronauts win because they're superheroes.
I reject the question.
Oh, I see. One of
I'm
these guys.
copping out. I'm
It's
copping out.
no, you're not copping out. You're interested in a different paradigm.
Let me put it this way. If the astronauts are ninja astronauts, astronauts win. If the astronauts are just like scientist astronauts, then astronauts lose. But I'm going to be down with the ninjas all the time. Well, this was a lot of fun. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Yes, thank you.
And we'll see you next time around with something cool. Couldn't tell
We got
you.
to think of it first.
Yeah, we air these out of order, so I don't know what's coming up next week, but
Yeah,
it's
neither do I.
good next week, next 2 weeks. But hey, see y'all later.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Our theme music is by Christopher Piatek.